From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon and welcome to the African and Middle Eastern Division of the Library of Congress. I'm Mary Jane Deeb, Chief of the Division, and I would like to welcome you all here in our reading room for a wonderful program. As most of you already know, our division is made up of three sections: the African, the Near East, and the Hebraic sections. We're responsible for materials from 78 countries in the Near East, Central Asia, the Caucasus, as well as from the entire continent of Africa, North and Sub-Sahara. And our Hebraica and Judaica collections come from all over the world. We also serve these materials to patrons here in our reading room and organize programs, exhibits, conferences, and other activities that highlight these collections and that inform our patrons about the countries and the cultures these publications come from. The librarians in this division, as well as in a number of other divisions, are themselves published scholars with a knowledge of the languages and cultures of the countries for which they are responsible. The African section is very active in acquiring and developing collections, briefing visitors from all the countries of the region, and organizing programs, symposia, workshops, and more. Last year, the African section, in partnership with the Poetry and Literature Center and the Africa Society of the National Summit on Africa, launched a new series called Conversations with African Poets and Writers. We've had Professor Ali Mazrui come here. He's the Albert Schweitzer Professor in the Humanities at Binghamton University. Susan Kiguli, a wonderful Ugandan poetess and writers. We had the Poet Laureate of South Africa, Kiara Petsi Kego Sitsil. We had Donato Nodongo, one of the most important writers from the Republic of Guinea. We had Helon Habila, an award-winning Nigerian writer who teaches at George Mason University. And just yesterday, we had a South African author, published author and writer, Mandla Kayesi Machumza. And he's also the head of the Center for the Book in South Africa, and who talked about his writing in his own native Xhosa. The library also has offices in the region to acquire materials on Africa, including a major office in Nairobi. But recently, we have contracted with the Council for American Research Centers, Overseas Research Centers abroad, to collect materials from West Africa. The center is the West Africa Research Center work in Dakar, Senegal, and I'm bringing this up because our speaker today is from Senegal. And that center actually collects from 11 countries from West Africa, uses specialists in the region, indigenous speakers of the languages to collect materials for us. And so Dakar and in Senegal is a very important alternative center, other center, for collecting materials apart from Nairobi. And today we have from Dakar, Professor Magueye Kasse, visiting Fulbright Scholar at Howard University and Associate Professor of German Language and Literature at Cheikh Anta Diop University in Dakar, Senegal. And he will be speaking about African Americans and Germany, the pluralistic and multifaceted presence of Africa in Germany. He has many accomplishments, and Dr. Angel Baptiste from Ahmed will be introducing him. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome to the African section, or the African and Middle Eastern Division in the library. Before introducing our speaker, I'd like to say it's been, 4 or 5 months now, Magueye. I received a call from Howard University, Dr. Cham, chair of the African Studies and Research Program at Howard. And he mentioned to me that there was a visiting scholar, visiting Fulbright fellow in residence at the center, and asked could I assist them here at the Library of Congress in their research activities. Dr. Kasse came and saw me at the library, and little did I realize that his query would be so challenging to me. When he came, I thought, oh, this will be pretty easy. German colonial relations in Africa. After talking to Dr. Kasse for about 10 minutes, I realized we're not just talking about Africa. We're talking about Germans' relations with Africa and the African diaspora. In terms of identifying information resources, Dr. Kasse used almost every reading room in this library. He used the reading or library facilities at the Holocaust Museum, at the Moreland Spingarn Center at Howard University. And via electronic tools, we virtually went into the catalogs of European libraries, German libraries, and some of your African library catalogs. So Dr. Kasse, I would like to say thank you for being here at the Library of Congress. You also allowed me to see gaps that we have in our collections and that we must try to acquire. Now, as an introduction, I'd like to say that Dr. Kasse is a professor of German in the Department of Germanic Languages and Civilizations, the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, at the University of Sheikh Anta Diop in Dakar, Senegal. In 2008, he served as General Commissioner of DACART, the 8th African Contemporary Art Biennial in Dakar, and currently he is a visiting Fulbright Scholar in Residence in the African Studies and Research Program at Howard University. Dr. Kasse's current research interests in the historical experiences of Africans, Afro-Germans, European Africans, and African Americans examines many diverse topics, including the German colonial presence in Africa, the Black military experience in Germany, the life stories of Afro-Germans, Afro-American culture and performers in Germany, and the fate of Africans or Blacks in Nazi Germany concentration camps. I would like to note that in documenting the record of Germany's historic relations with Africa and its African diaspora communities, Dr. Kasse is recovering a valuable cultural and historical memory that is largely unknown. Before welcoming Dr. Kasse to the podium, I would like to thank him for a special gift donation that he provided to our Africana collections. And this is a set of audio recordings or interviews of the personal accounts of African Holocaust survivors. Dr. Kasse.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me today to speak about something I really find very interesting and very important for us. Thank you to Angel for her support from the beginning. Researchers dream of being selected in the Fulbright program. It is a very good opportunity to come over and visit archives and libraries in the United States, especially Washington, D.C., such as the Library of Congress, the United States the Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Moreland Spingarn Research Center at Howard University, the National Archives, the German Historical Institute, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in New York, among others. In our various research activities, and thanks to the invitations of the State Department and some universities in Washington, D.C. in particular, I noted the abundance of archives and libraries dealing with our topic. In order to satisfactorily complete my research project initiated on the subject since 2000, it was essential for me to have the opportunity to come to Washington again to continue my investigations in a more in-depth and sustained manner. The Fulbright grant I got was very helpful for me to complete my research and also my pedagogical background. Since the beginning of my research, I have covered a sizable amount of material. I would like to thank all the people in the research centers I have visited for their kindness and professionalism. They are aware of the needs of scholars. We greatly appreciate their time and assistance. I want to further explore the Schomburg Research Center in New York in these coming days to get more familiarized with documentaries on African prisons and its multiple facets in Germany. I would like to focus first on who we are, where we come from, and why we get an interest in searching and teaching about the German-African relations over the centuries. Let me summarize it. I'm a German scholar from Africa with an interdisciplinary background and interest. Many in Germany often wonder why Africans are interested in German language and culture. This particular question is not often asked to those Africans who learn and teach other languages and cultures such as English, Russian, and Arabic, for example. To answer correctly this question, I have to go back to the situation of Africa, in particular in sub-Saharan Africa from the colonial period to nowadays. I want to emphasize the historical situation in which Africa was and is still involved from the days of slavery through the European colonization and the economical, social, and cultural problems this continent has had to endure. The image resulting from that history is most of the time one of poverty, political problems referring most of the time to colonial periods, the state building, and especially the kind of relations we have with former colonial metropolis, and especially Germany. Also, the German colonial presence was very short, from 1884 to the end of World War I and the Treaty of Versailles, 1918-1919. Those problems result also from bad governance, economical strategies, which do not allow sustainable development and most of the time are imposed by the international financial institutions with structural adjustment programs and their effects, creating cash economies that displace subsistence economies and produce artificial unemployment. From this legacy, Africa seems to be the lost continent out of history, unable to be part of the globalizing market and derive benefits from fair economic partnerships. This globalization also has to mean a positive integration of cultural values. The presence of black people of African descent in Germany today is a result of various encounters at 4 levels. This can be localized first by the end of the World War I, producing in Germany out of its former colonies a very special kind of black immigration. On the second level, we have a larger African immigration because the Federal Republic of Germany in 1949 took a great place and projected itself as a very important political, economical, and cultural partner for the newly independent African countries. Immigration to Germany grew also because the Federal Republic of Germany wanted since 1950 to drive the European economy. Africans wanted to seize this opportunity but were confronted to cultural and social barriers. Germany wanted to be seen as the opposite of the other Germany, the German Democratic Republic, a very open and liberal society, trying to have with most of the African countries regular relations without any kind of or rejection and somehow racism. However, publication and experiences from outsiders tell a different story. The Federal Republic of Germany and its industries needed the natural resources Africa's and new markets. The presence of African students and scholars in this Germany was therefore justified and motivated by the policy and the ideological strategies based on the so-called economical miracle of the 70s, which continues despite some social and economical realities to focus the interests of young Africans whose dream it was and always is to participate in this success, hoping that the memory of the past will prevent its repetition. They attempt to get to Germany in a very complicated context in which African immigrants were faced with problems of being accepted and integrated in the German society. The economic crisis did not let this policy of open doors for Africans continue, and this, like in France, in Great Britain, and Spain, led to many forms of restrictions for the immigrants. There are today between 300,000 and a half of million black people living in Germany, many of whom are African immigrants or students married to German partners. This immigration completes in the black images those populations comprised of descendants of children born to French colonial soldiers after World War I and African American soldiers after World War II. In our time, mobility of people and ideas throughout the whole world is essential. Therefore, I believe intercultural communication and dialogue are critical to accepting and integrating each other within our common cultural identity. The best-known African poet and theoretician of the negritude movement of the 50s, the former president of Senegal, former inmate of Germany after the French defeat of 1940 in a camp for colonial subjects where he learned German language and culture, was very aware of the significance of German culture and learned a lot from Johann Wolfgang Goethe's poetry, works, and theoretical approach of world literature. Senghor tried in his broad theoretical approaches to conceptualize the need of global cultural dialogue of African people, especially with the Federal Republic of Germany, who wanted to contribute to the human development of our time. This is one reason why, in our research and teaching, we suggest the need to understand how Africa has evolved from the beginning of its encounter with Europe. On the other hand, we try to give the framework for understanding why Africans are mostly rejected in Germany, somehow in a very conflicting way, because of a certain kind of image built over centuries regarding, first of all, the racial element. And it is very important to try to know how this was continually settled all along the centuries of cultural encounters between European and African civilizations. An important focus in my research is to explain how all that has come. Beside what we previously found on this matter in various publications, it seemed relevant to come to the United States to pursue the research that now integrated an aspect I had not considered in my earlier work, the African-American experience of Germany. I found out some parallels. Both Africans and African-American studies have indeed significant parallels that in relation to Germany, and my aims are to demonstrate how and why negative images persist. I teach at the Department of German Language and Civilization, which is not called a German department, because our students do not only learn the German language. From the first year to postgraduate level, the teaching provided is based on an interdisciplinary approach, which includes literature, language, history, philosophy, sociology, anthropology, ethnology, art in all dimensions, from movie to music and performing art. Angel talked about DAC Art, the biannual Festival of Art, which General Commissioner I was 2008. This biennial covers all the African continent and the African diaspora. It is also based on a particular participatory approach which encourages students to contribute to building up the general and interdisciplinary knowledge imparted to them. So our curriculum is objective-driven, and as a former head of the department, director of the pedagogy and the university reform, and serving in the cabinet of the university president for over 14 years, I have successfully nurtured and supported students in achieving the highest academic accomplishment in that way. Our German studies, both in teaching and research, cover, as earlier mentioned, the indispensable language skills acquisition, but also German literature and German civilization. Germany across the centuries, the two German states from 1949 to 1989, and the unified Germany. Like I already mentioned it, and I would like to stress the point, because it is relevant to our coming into the United States. Our German studies are intercultural. We built bridges between historians, like I say, philosopher, linguists, development and economic experts, and many others. And we are strong believers in cross-fertilization. A great deal of my research and publications is about that precisely. I've taken part in a large number of conferences, congresses, national and international, and I'm a member of numerous international forums, which includes the Society of Intercultural Germanistic in Germany, the International Association of German Studies, and the Association of South African Germanists. In the same way, I have actively participated to the setting up of the Association of Germanists in Sub-Saharan Africa, which brings together German scholars from French-speaking as well as English-speaking Sub-Saharan Africa. It is based on all these activities and in the interest for African-German relationship in all their facets that we understood the need to perform research on area which so far have been little researches or inadequately in their interdisciplinary aspect highlighted, in particular the contribution of Black African to German civilization and culture, economically and culturally. The treatment of Africa, Africans, and the African diaspora without excluding the African American because of their African descent, and Africans' image as such and as well. The results of my investigations prove that point, and it is new, interesting, and light up my research purpose in many ways. I want also to contribute to the existing body of work focusing on African and African diaspora relations with Germany. I am particularly interested in showing now how this relationship has developed, and sometimes very positively, in Germany, influencing Germany in many ways through the arts, like, for example, the reception of African arts in Germany, from Karl Einstein and his work on Neger plastic to the jazz with various influences of this art in Berlin during the 20s and all over the Third Reich. I want also integrate interdisciplinary aspects in this research, what I have found in the existing materials. This explains why, over the last few years, my research focuses on the presence of Africans and other Black in Germany from the 18th century through the end of the World War I to this day. It should be noted that my PhD dissertation, completed in 1980, investigated the image of Black people in German literature from 1870 to 1933. This image was shaped first by fear and various forms of rejection as responses to the unknown, according to colors and their meanings on religious spheres. These have been produced down the centuries psychologically and racially motivated reactions long before German people ever saw Black people, to whom they even denied their humanity. And in German language, from Middle Ages to the 18th century, the Black man was associated to the devil. I quote, der Schwarze, der Moor, der Neger, which successively, in particularly during the slavery and the colonization, means the one who needed to be educated to work. Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, had justified this point of view in some of his theoretical works. For a long time, many scholars thought that Germany had nothing to do with the slavery system. Even so, late Germany had taken part in the European slavery system. At the official end of the slavery, in 1848, the Africans found themselves in an era, the new industrial age, in which Europe and America were striving to develop. The same prejudice could consider the fact that the USA were not part of the Berliner Congo Conference of 1884, which decided to conquer Africa after the end of slavery, to pay more attention to the needs of exploitation of the human and natural resources of the African continent. It may be the first relation in three ways: Germany, USA, and Africa, through the economical needs of Europe and America, in which African is the middle of the interest stand. The identity of the African was therefore ideologically, economically, and psychologically targeted, not only denied as a subject, making his own history, to quote the German philosopher Hegel, who wrote that Africa was enveloped in the deepest night, not being capable to participate in the running of the world. It is in Hegel, 100 lectures to the philosophy. But he was also, because of that, and at the same time, subject to various kinds of discrimination. Africa was seen also in Germany as to be conquered. Also, this colonization was shorter than other European colonial powers. Compared to other major European colonial powers like France or Great Britain, Germany tried to appear as the best colonial power, and the Treaty of Versailles of 1918-1919 was presented as a treachery against Germany. This attitude will survive the Weimar Republic and allow Hitler to conduct a very ambiguous policy towards the African diaspora in Germany and use it as propaganda for his economical policy, his willpower to get the former German colonies in Africa, and especially towards the racist South Africa. On one hand, the Hitler regime continued, because of its racial governance, to reinforce negative stereotypes of African and the African diaspora. For example, the only issues of these were to be confined to some stereotyped part in racial movies or in circus, or to some negative social roles. On the other hand, and conversely, this propaganda also sought to buttress his dream for colonial reconquest, like the promoting of a very special stereotyped kind of African arts in Germany, which reinforced the above-mentioned roles. For example, the German Africa show, under the concept of good German colonization. In fact, it was on the long term the ambiguous policy of Hitler, which could not be no longer sustainable regarding to the context of the anti-Semitic Nuremberg laws from 1935, which were applied also to black too. It seemed to me relevant to look at the legacy of the African image and its impact on the perception of Africans and Africans-Americans' life and culture in Germany, their struggles for rights, and their relation to Germany in a very productive way of understanding the German history. That is somehow a way I see, for example, in the movie of our Senegalese film maker Sembène Ousmane, Camp de Charoy is the name of the movie. The Charoy massacre was the mutiny by and mass killing of French West Africa troops by French forces on November 31, 1944. The tirailleurs involved, the former colonial troops involved, were former prisoners of war who had been repatriated to West Africa and placed in a holding camp awaiting discharge. Among other points, Sembène shows a part with a Nazi helmet. This part is silent, proving his drama, stress, and shock, because he apparently was an inmate and a survivor of some concentration camp in Germany. He is very aware of the world situation in which the tirailleurs were involved. Mostly he is the one who shows how deep the whole enterprise is, which tries to back up and erase the historical memory of African people in the various and tragic African-European encounters. In the intercultural way of understanding the meanings of an engagement like Semben Ousmane did, we have to face those realities in a way that emphasizes the necessity of the only way mankind has to understand each other. In the same way, I would like to mention those black people who belong to the Hall of Fame of African American culture and progressive thinking, very involved in the struggles of their time, who deserve a special place in the history of cross-cultural encounters, beginning with those of the 19th century, like W.E. Du Bois and Alan Leroy Locke, who have studied in Berlin. Admiring German culture, both men saw a similarity between Black America and Germany in their struggles to achieve unity and power. They deeply respected the German intellectual tradition, notably the work of Johann Gottfried Herder on the transcendent power of folk and culture, and the philosopher Gottlieb Fichte in his nationalistic addresses to the German nation. By the way, it is interesting to compare Du Bois and Leopold Sédar Senghor in their views on German culture. In this matter, Johann Gottfried Herder's work appears more progressive regarding Africa than Goethe. Also, both hated in their works nationalism and absolutism, and Herder went further to understand and fear the extreme to which the folk theory could tend, and that Jews and black men should enjoy full rights. In his work, Ideas upon the Philosophy of the History of Mankind, among other works of Herder, he quoted, I quote, "The notwithstanding the varieties of the human form, there is but one and the same species of man throughout the whole earth." End of the quotation. I want also mention the work of the activist Marie-Therese Terrell. I discovered her, thank Angel, very involved in civil rights campaign and her relation to Germany through very important encounters which discusses interesting topics regarding the rights of people in a gender approach like the International Congress of Women held in Berlin 1904. She was the only black woman attending this conference, among others. Talking about intercultural communication and culture dialogue in the Afro-German relations, we mean being aware of how difficult it is to make it real despite the cultural differences and somehow the legacy of historical facts, which we should really understand and explain through education, knowing exactly who we are and where we come from. Let me quote, for example, the interesting work of Marie-Therese Terrell at the time she was staying in Berlin. In his work, A Colored Woman in a White World, published 2005. I talked with a young colored man who was studying in Europe because he possessed exceptional talent. He seemed listless rather than lazy, and it pained me to hear from some of his friends that he was wasting his time. When I urged this young man to avail himself of the marvelous opportunities and advantages he enjoyed, he replies, "What is the use of my trying to do anything extraordinary and worthwhile? A man must have some kind of racial background to amount to anything. He must have a firm racial foundation on which to build. What have we accomplished as a race? Almost nothing. We are descent from slaves. How can you expect a people with such background as that to compete successfully with white people?" End of quotation. In the racial state, the black man has to overcome this bias it puts in him. Very contemporary. Terrell quotes further a crucial question in the black and white relation, which continues to act negatively in the societies, and especially in Germany. She wrote, "Now that Hitler has risen to power and had launched a savage attack against both non-white people and Jews, I wonder what my fate would have been if I had married my German friend. Where would I be today? Would I have been forced to leave Germany? If there had been any children, what will be their status now? I sank a beneficent providence that I was spared the painful ordeal through which I would have been obliged to pass if I had married Herr von D. I had made up my mind definitively that I would not marry a white man if I lived in the United States, and I feared I would not be happy as an exile in a foreign land. End of quotation. The Golden Twenties in Berlin focused remarkable figures like Josephine Baker, but also bad situation which continued during the 30s, like among others, the fate of a brilliant trumpet player, vocals, violin, piano leader, and dancer, Valeda Snow. Despite her immense talent, she found herself trapped in Denmark, and she was sent to a concentration camp as a non-Aryan, where she remained incarcerated for almost 2 years, sharing this situation with Jews. Let us bring a citation from the book of Lauren Halder, Renaissance Woman, 5 Plays, 1979, a dialogue between Valeda and the Jewish inmate in the camp. Valeda, why are you here? Erika, I am a Jew. My God. Erika, God, does it exist? Do people really believe in him? Valeda, oh honey, of course they do. And help is on the way. Erika, I don't think it is going to save many people. Valeda, just the rest of the word. But what are you still here? Erika, he's trying to wear me down. Valeda, trying to wear you down? That doesn't make sense. Why not just kill you? Erika, because then he's denied her his perverted pleasure. That is why. Valeda, well, then going to do that more. Valeda Snow is here. You know how to dance, honey? Erika, I can waltz if my feet move at all. Valeda, 10 dogs are going to move. Now, you stand next to me and do just what I do. End of citation. Despite the fate of such entertainers during this period, jazz was a real human contribution to the understanding of people from various cultural backgrounds through the arts. This fact is relevant to our aims of explaining the history of the various encounters between Africa in general and Germany. However, it needs a real understanding of the real historical facts. So it is, for example, in studying the mentality of the German people during the Olympic Games of 1936 and their appreciation of blackness, which lighted up the nonsense of Aryan superiority and racial philosophy of Hitler. Joe Louis and Max Schelling, who became close friends despite the situation and their involvement in the World War II through the art of boxing, are an interesting example. For over 2 decades, the topic of blackness in Germany has drawn increasing interest among scholars. It is the first level of the presence of Africans in Germany. Since the initiative of the Black Germans 1986, a number of colloquia and symposia in Germany and Africa have addressed the issue, considering, for example, the realization, the struggle, the identity problem most so-called Africans Germans from African or African-American descent face in Germany, and which led them to speak for themselves in poetry, novels, entertainment, and movies. Some published autobiographical pieces after visiting Africa, the land of their ancestor, or the US in search of their origins. The results were not always satisfying. The socializations models were and still are a relevant factor in the search of our identity. It finds somehow a catharsis way in writing, like Hans-Jürgen Massaquoy's autobiography, Destined to Witness. Massaquoy describes his childhood and youth in Hamburg during the Nazi rise to power. His work provides a unique point of view as one of very few German-born mulattoes in all of Nazi Germany, shunned but not persecuted by the Nazis. The dichotomy remained a key theme throughout his whole life. Alike, there are the same ways of escaping horrible social situations in performing arts, like the artist Joseph Nassi. This little-known black American artist of Jewish descent was caught up in Brussels on April 1942 on the grounds that he held a passport of an enemy nation. He was sent to Beverlo, a Wehrmacht prison and transit camp. In November, he was transferred to Germany in civilian prisoner of war camps, Laufen and Tistmoning. He completed over 200 mesmerizing works during his incarceration. The collection of In the Shadow of the Tower, for example, is one of over 100 powerful paintings and drawings depicting the oppressive nature of a camp life. It conveys a sense of confinement, isolation, and suffocation of spirit with an evident hope to return to normalcy. His portraits of black internees of concentration camps try by this way to escape, support, and testify on the situation of inmates. The essence of his painting, the subjects of his art, and despite the horrible situation in the concentration camp, shows humanity, serenity, and belief in brotherhood between the inmates. Poetry, in the same way, is also a form of resistance. Also, some of the most gifted do not always find salvation, being denied, like the dramatic suicide of the late and wonderful Mai Ayim, whose father came from Ghana and the mother from Germany, whose work received the recognition he deserved from African Germans after she passed away. Also in movies, like the interesting one of Mo Asumang, Roots Germania, telling the story of this African German, which started when she first heard the song that called for her murder. This ballad is for you, from the neo-Nazi band White Aryan Rebels. The film discusses the migrants and racism theme. I would also like to mention John Cantara for his wonderful documentaries regarding the life, the history, and the situation of African Germans like Theodor Vonja Michael and his siblings who survived the horrors of the Third Reich and the Holocaust. Participating to this interest for the legacy and presence of Africans and people of various African descent, having produced a number of articles and presentations on the subject, including interviews with some of them, and especially African survivors of concentration camp before they pass away, I keep discovering a large range of materials in the archives, like the minutes of the trials held by the USA after the World War II. The testimonies of Nazi prosecutors, material covering a large and horrible time in which black people, Africans and African Americans alike, were denied, rejected, mistreated, mutilated, and murdered in concentration camp. Thanks to the German Office for Academic Exchanges, I had the opportunity to begin my research in the archives of Koblenz, Berlin, and Neuengamme, and my investigation established the importance of the African presence in Germany during the 19th century, also during the traveling exhibitions, which shows black among other so-called exotic subjects, which contribute towards a certain kind of absolute negative image of black people. I also had access to the minutes of parliamentary debates from the Weimar Republic to the Third Reich in the Gestapo archives. I have visited the German archives in Koblenz and Berlin and found interesting traces of the treatment of black people and Africans during the occupation of the left bank of the Rhine in 1999, the racist and xenophobic campaign that this presents aroused the racist campaign carried out by the Weimar Republic, Hitler, and the Third Reich. The sterilization of the so-called Rhineland bastards. We visited some concentration camps where were held prisoners of war of African descent who took part in the resistance movement in France especially, but also former African colonial subjects and African American prisoners of war, murdered as already indicated in those camps. Some of them were subjected to medical experimentations. It seems to me therefore relevant to find out and explain the connection between eugenics research applied to Africans in Germany and to African Americans in the United States. I have found indeed interesting material in this respect, including records of medical experiments made on Africans, Jews, Gypsies, ill people, social outcasts in the concentration camps. And I tried in my research to find out the meaning of these connections. I wanted to show how deep these connections were and how they pursued the same racial goals in both countries among the scientists before the National Socialism came to power. It is interesting, in fact, to mention these coincidences in Germany before and after World War I and in the USA at the same time. The victimization of Africans and African Americans, I mean, the eugenic control of African Americans, in fact, birth control, the medical experimentation on black Americans, medical apartheid, like Harriet Washington calls the Tuskegee syphilis experimentation in the USA, and the experiences of the scientists and doctors of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Human Heredity, Teaching, and Eugenics in Berlin, involved in carrying out research according to the racial aims of the Nazi state. Dr. Wolfgang Abel was one of the scientists who joined the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, like Professor Dr. Ottmar von Verschuer or Joseph Mengele and Eugene Fischer, preparing race experts reports for the NSDAP, which demanded that the group of the Rhineland bastards, a group of mixed-race children, not be allowed to propagate. 1913, Dr. Fischer's book, Die Revolte Bastard und das Bastardisierungsproblem by Menschen, The Bastards of Rehoboth and the Problem of Miscegenation in Men, is published. Fischer writes about the people of mixed blood in German Southwest Africa. We should provide them with the minimum amount of protection they require for the survival as a race inferior to ourselves. And we should do this only as long as they are useful to us. After this, free competition should prevail, and in my opinion, this will lead to their decline and destruction. It was a continuation of Eugene Fischer's work in Southwest Africa, where he began the sterilization of black Herero and Namas women after the genocide of this folk, October 2, 1904, which human cost at that time, 80%, 16,000 people, was very high. It was really a genocide of these people, of this folk. There are some similar attempts of building a master race at the same time in the USA, in Germany, and Hitler documents from Nazi war crimes show that blacks, both African American and African soldiers from Africa serving in the armies of colonial powers, were singled out for mistreatment once they were captured by the Nazis and subject to medical experimentation too. There are also abundant similarities made between the persecuted Jews and the Africans, which were continually produced and highlighted in German society during the Holocaust. My aim is in this direction to find out how these were ideologically, economically, and not least racially motivated. Another aspect in these similarities, which could explain the racial policy of excluding black people from any kind of positive cultural evolution, is the exhibitions of living black subjects at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century in Germany. Best known were the traveling shows, wandering circuses, and exhibitions of black men and women, during which experimentations and studies were conducted to establish the inferiority of the black man. They were made on the subjects like those made on Herero's head, brought to Germany for their purposes after the genocide of 1904. This explains the relevance of our topic. Likewise, I also focused on the case of the children of black American GIs stationed in Germany after the defeat of the fascism in 1945. Those children born from love or sexual encounters between African American soldiers and local women grow up in traumatic situations resulting from the absence of their father, their African or African American's father, including the so-called brown babies during the occupation of Germany after the World War II. Their fate recalled somehow in Germany the situation of the Rhineland bastard after World War I during the Third Reich. It was no more comprehensible and acceptable to think about sterilization But long debates in parliament and in the society took place to know what to do with those children. The families were not willing to accept them because of the shame they carried. An issue seemed to determine the fate of those children, to send them in Africa or to find for them foster families in the USA among willing African American families. The fate of the brown babies in Germany, as in the United States, their problem reported in the German and American newspapers, and more recently, 2011, in the German movie called Brown Babies, to remind the essence of exclusion and rejection of these children, African American descent. It is interesting to study, on one hand, the racism those GIs were exposed in their own country, in the United States Army, as normal citizens of a country in conflict with a racist state, forgetting for a while the discrimination they were subjected to. On the other hand, the same kind of discrimination they were exposed to in Germany as black inmates in concentration camps, the way some of them were murdered and lynched, and almost in the same context of rejection of blackness, like in the USA, nearly at the same time, which is reflected in the Nazi propaganda. These soldiers were black, and that came with all negative and derogatory traits attached to that by the dominant ideology of the time. It is very important for me to be aware of the many studies conducted on the same issue, to try to summarize and analyze them from a new historical and intercultural perspective, and to try to understand how many facts contribute to the negative black images during the colonial and post-colonial German periods. This intercultural perspective means new ways of producing knowledge and transforming social relations. I shall conclude by saying how important it is today to analyze and understand the different way of intercultural communication in the African studies, with the help of research based on cultural aspects of so many encounters, which are enhanced by the mobility in the new form of globalization of the world. We must understand very clearly how new problems just are the consequences of dramatically unsolved situations in which African and African American are involved. To understand the other in his difference means accepting first the difference, biological, social, and historical nature. The fact that some African German women try to show new ways of practicing their difference in very interesting gender studies, or that many critics try to integrate the struggle of African and German African descent for the respect of their difference, which includes the real acceptance of the entire citizenship, is a trend of our time. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Kasse. We'll have a 10-minute question and answer, and I'd like to note that this program has been webcast, and for those participating in the Q&A session, you are giving your consent to being webcast. So we'll have a short question and answer.
Yeah.
No questions.
If I remember correctly, Hegel stated that history began in the East and ends in the West, and that Africa has no part to play in the development of humanity. How is the response of African Germans
To that?
statement?
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for the question.
Repeat it.
Yeah, the question is how we respond to Hegel's thinking about Africa. I said in my presentation that our aim is to include in the interdisciplinary way other disciplines like philosophy, history, and so on and so forth. So we used to have in our teaching and research too, to face those problems. A very close friend of mine has written a very nice book about Hegel and Africa. And I said to him, you must add to that the mentality in Germany at the time of Hegel. Hegel has never visited Africa. He just read the relation from those from Great Britain, even if they were German people, German scientists, who discover Africa and write about Africa. And he writes that Europe was in the civilization. ASEAN is at the door of the civilization, but Africa is deep in the deepest night of the evolution. It means that Africa has nothing to do. And he went further, saying that the slavery, like Kant, is, we can understand why African people are reducing to slavery, because it is of the nature of the African people. They are too lazy because of the climate. You know, in the 17th, 18th century, it was a lot of discussion about the origin of black people and the origin of the color of our skin. And they were trying to say that if there is Africa, it just may have African people. And we try to understand how the image of the black man has evolved from Middle Ages to Hegel. Everything associated with black was negative. The symbol of punition is black. Black is a color that, with which we cannot identify ourselves. And I shall remember a very interesting book for children written at that time. It is called The Struwwelpeter. It is many stories for children, for kids. In one of the stories, it is called The History of the Black Man, or the Little Black Man. A little black man was going his way, and three white little kids were laughing at him. Then came a grown-up who said, "Why are you laughing at this poor little black man? At this poor little black man? Why are you laughing at this little poor black man?" The kid continued to laugh at the little poor black man, second time, third time. It is interesting to know how this little poor black man is defined. In German language, it is, es ging spazieren ein Kohl, Pech, Raben, schwarzer Moor. 5 words to define a little black man. Es ging spazieren ein Kohl is, I don't know how you say it. Tu peux m'aider? Le charbon, comment ça se dit? Coal, yeah. Coal, pech. If you have pech in German language, it means you have no chance. Yeah? Tu n'as pas de chance, pas? You are unlucky, thank you. Coal, pech, Raben is a bird, black bird, who is known as a stealing. Yes, 2. Kohl, Pech, Raben, Schwarz, der Schwarze, I say, is the devil. Moor is another word to define the black man. This little poor black man is defined in 5 items, you know. And the kids are continuing to laugh. The punition to stop them laughing was to bring them in a black ink. He dropped them in the ink so that they could get black. It is very interesting to analyze, you know, in the mentality of a young German kid, how he grew up with this idea of blackness. What is blackness? So Hegel did continue this way, despite the fact that Hegel, a very great philosopher, was and still is, but the fact is that. Have I answered to your question?
Any additional questions?
Did you come across any surprising information while working here at the Library of Congress that you didn't already know about your topic?
Yes. Yes, definitively. Not only here, with the help of Angel, but through some lectures here, I had to go on the other side, in the Madison building,
Yes, the Madison, the motion
motion picture building,
newspaper.
newspapers building, and music division. And I met a very nice encounter with someone who is very lovely. He's performing at WPMW, Larry Applebaum, who bring me to someone very interesting for my research. He is white, come from Germany, was member of the Hitler Youth in a so-called special school for children with many talents in music. Musikschule is the name in German, Musikschule. Very protected by the Nazis. This man was in this school. He knew, by the way, Jews in the neighborhood. And he left the school to come over to the United States, and he performed with Miles Davis, Duke Ellington, Armstrong, and the whole frame of jazz musicians of the 50s. And this guy tell me about his story as a musician, and he gave me footage of jazz playing by Jew musicians in concentration camp made by Himmler. It is a very interesting topic. I know the influence of jazz. If you read the book of Masakoi, Destiny to Witness, he's talking about the influence of jazz music at that time in Germany. And because the Nazis were very aware of the importance and the interest of jazz among the youth, Himmler, who captured Jewish musicians and brought them to a concentration camp, obliged them to play jazz music in a broadcast. It is a very nice connection. I never be aware of that before I come here. So, like I say, I began this research for some years ago, traveling in Germany, but I wanted to come here and to see, especially in the Library of Congress and in the National Archives, to follow the minutes of the trials held 1945, and the way people, the prosecutors of the black and the Jews, the way they were explaining what they have done during the Holocaust. It reveals a kind of mentality. Not only that, they were, how you say it, the sentences were over to death or to 30 years of jail. And the interesting thing is the letters written by the neighbors to testify, to try to justify their behaviors during this period, from the church, from any kind of people dealing with that matter. I say, even if you are talking about the end of the Nazi era, 1945, it is not surprising that during these years, nothing very deep was done in Germany to face the Nazism. I remember in one book which brings very high debates, Hitler's, the man who wanted to follow Hitler is the name of the book. I translated, but it is not the correct translation. But the idea is, how did the German people follow Hitler? And I found here some nice, interesting thing also regarding Leni von Riefenstahl, who made a very nice movie, a very important movie, during the rise of the Nazi power, but not only that, the Olympic Games. The most beautiful pictures we have on the Olympic game, and to Jesse Owen, we have it through Leni von Riefenstahl, who years after made a very nice book about African from Nubia. You know, this kind of black man, very strong, very nice. You know, sometimes you discover something, it is the interest in the research. You discover something, and you go further. You get a next interest, the next thing. You know, it is amazing. I would like really to thank all the people here who were very helpful for that matter.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kasse.
And I'm sorry for my very bad English.
Okay. That concludes our program, and we thank all of you for joining us today. I see a number of new faces here in the African Middle Eastern Reading Room. Please visit our website and join us for other programs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Merci.
That was vraiment.
Vraiment.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.